The storm came without mercy, howling like a ghost through Montana's heartland, burying every secret, every regret, beneath an endless, unforgiving white. It was the kind of night that took lives where old debts came knocking, and the cold seeped into your bones, whispering you might not see another sunrise. A man stood alone in that tempest, voice cracking as he called out, eyes straining against the blinding fury. Fear tightened his chest, gnawed at his resolve. It wasn't just the storm he feared, it was loss, a shadow he knew too well. Somewhere, a child was missing, and each frozen breath felt like a promise slipping away, one heartbeat at a time. In that moment, under skies blacker than sin, he knew that life could steal everything you loved in an instant. But sometimes if you were lucky, if fate found pity, the storm might also give something back. Harvey Hank Morgan woke just before dawn, the same way he had every morning since retiring from the old lumber mill. At 62, he was lean with a face carved by wind, time, and memories that refused to fade. His small house, when he'd built onto with his own hands years ago, creaked around him in the early light, telling him the roof might need patching soon. Outside, faint traces of Montana winter lingered in the air. The sky glowed with a tired kind of pink, and a thin crust of frost clung to the grass like a stubborn memory. Hank moved slowly but deliberately, from bed to kitchen. He filled the kettle with water, paused to rub a knot in his shoulder, and set it to boil on the ancient stove that groaned in protest. Propped beside the sink was a photograph of a young woman in her late 20s, beaming from the driver's seat of a pickup truck, a toddler perched on her lap. His daughter Jessica and granddaughter Lucy. The truck was gone now, traded for a few $100 to cover a surprise hospital bill. Jessica had passed 3 years back from a sudden illness, leaving Lucy orphaned. And so Lucy, now 8, became Hank's second chance at fatherhood, though he often felt he had fewer answers this time around. He didn't rely on Social Security as much as he could. Pride still carried weight in his heart. The veteran's pension helped, but not by a long shot. He made some money mending fences for neighbors, fixing old tractors on farmland a mile away, and selling wood carvings at the local farmer's market. A craftsman's hands, folks said of him, thick-knuckled and steady, the kind that remember how to mold something from nothing. He used them to craft small figurines, bears, moose, eagles, whatever tourists passing through Meadow Falls might buy when they wanted a bit of Montana charm. His real worry today was Lucy's birthday. She was turning 8. Hank had made her a promise he'd find her something special, something that showed her she wasn't forgotten, that she was loved. Yet when he peered into his wallet, all he found was $7, a few coins, and a punched card from the diner that still needed 4 more meals to earn a free lunch. No credit cards, he'd cut them up when the bills piled too high. No hidden stash, he'd sold his wedding band half a year ago when the water heater blew. He told himself Lucy wouldn't mind. She was a good kid, wise beyond her years. She rarely asked for much aside from new crayons or extra time at the library. Still, she was a child who deserved a real birthday. A small voice whispered that maybe he should swallow his pride, call someone an old friend, the local church. But Hank dismissed the thought, convinced that this was his cross to bear. From the living room, Lucy emerged, hair sticking out at angles, wearing mismatched socks. She grinned when he handed her a cup of warm water with a splash of milk in it, the closest thing to hot chocolate they had. "Morning, Grandpa," she said in that lilting voice that made him feel 30 years younger. Outside, the first rays of sun caught the frost, turning it silver. Hank glanced at the photograph again. He wasn't just living for himself. Today, he needed to make good on that promise. They drove an old '94 Chevy S10 pickup that seemed held together by duct tape and Hank's stubborn prayers. Lucy called it Bluebell, though the paint had mostly chipped off, leaving the metal a patchwork of rust. She strapped herself in tight, hugging the ragged teddy bear she'd had since before her mother died. Hank turned the key and pumped the gas pedal. The engine coughed to life on the third try, and they lurched onto the road. Meadow Falls was the kind of town with a single main street, a diner named Sue's, a decrepit gas station, and a church that doubled as a community center. Tourists might pass through on their way to the national park, but few stayed. Hank's plan was to check every little storefront for something Lucy might like, something that cost less than $7. He hoped to find a used puzzle, or maybe a paint set, anything that would make her eyes light up. They passed by the diner. Hank slowed, nodding to old Tom Jenkins, who sat in his usual spot outside, whittling a stick. Tom raised a hand, then eyed Hank's truck with a look that said, "Still running, huh?" Hank pressed on the gate. Lucy, oblivious to the tension in Hank's chest, watched the scenery. She giggled at the stray cat perched on a fence. She chattered about a stray dog rumored to roam the outskirts of town. She reminded him they should get groceries soon. Milk was nearly out. Even at 8, Lucy was mindful of their finances. That made Hank's heart ache a little, feeling she was too young to worry. One by one, they poked their heads into small shops, an antique store that reeked of mothballs, a second-hand clothing store with worn jackets and dusty books, and a thrift store that mostly sold rummage items donated from bigger cities. Lucy found a jigsaw puzzle at the thrift store, but it was missing half the pieces. Hank kept searching. Late morning came and Lucy's stomach growled. Hank had an apple and a peanut butter sandwich in a paper bag. They sat on a bench near the courthouse steps to share a quick meal. The cold air made Hank's old knee injury flare up, but he tried to hide the wince from Lucy. After they finished the apple, Lucy pointed down a side street. "Look, Grandpa," she said, her excitement peaking. "That shop looks new." Hank followed her gaze. Tucked beside an old bakery was a small storefront with a hand-painted sign, "Evergreen Keepsakes and Toys." The display window had carved wooden figures, music boxes, and a few crocheted animals wearing tiny hats. It gave off an air of nostalgia, like stepping into a simpler decade. "Never saw that before," Hank murmured. He stood, crumpled the paper bag, and took Lucy's hand. "We'll take a look, but keep in mind our budget." Lucy nodded, hugging her teddy close. "I know, Grandpa." The shop bell jingled when they entered, releasing a gentle rush of warm air that smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla. Hank felt the tension in his back ease. Rows of handcrafted toys lined shelves, wooden trains, rag dolls, painted puzzles, and knitted animals. No flashy plastic packaging or neon lights, just a quiet, timeless charm. At the far end of the counter stood a woman, dressed simply in jeans and a cardigan, silver strands in her black hair. Her eyes were kind, as though she'd known Hank forever. The woman behind the counter introduced herself as Margaret Maggie Evans. She looked to be in her early 50s, with a warmth in her smile that made Hank lower his guard a notch. She greeted Lucy first, admiring the worn teddy bear that Lucy clutched. Lucy beamed under the attention. All around the shop, each toy seemed handcrafted with meticulous care. Hank noticed a small wooden horse with chipped paint, possibly antique, and paused to see the price tag, 15. That was more than double what he had. He moved on, checking each item's cost from the corner of his eye, trying not to look too desperate. Lucy, meanwhile, wandered toward a corner shelf displaying intricately carved animal figures, a moose, a wolf, an eagle, each about the size of her palm. She tentatively picked up a little fawn with painted eyes, but set it back quickly when she saw the price was $10. Hank felt a pang, wishing he could stretch that wallet a bit more. Maggie must have sensed the mood, because she glided from behind the counter, her low boots tapping softly against the hardwood floor. She knelt next to Lucy, pointing out a tiny wooden owl whose left wing was carved with filigree patterns. "See that swirl design?" Maggie said quietly. "My grandmother used to carve it for good luck." Lucy's eyes sparkled. "That's so pretty." Hank cleared his throat. "It is, but we're just, looking." Maggie stood up, her gaze flickering to Hank with gentle understanding. "It's important to find just the right piece, isn't it?" she said, then turned back to Lucy. "Why today? Though, is there a special occasion?" Lucy puffed up with pride. "It's my birthday." "Oh, well then," Maggie exclaimed, pretending to be surprised. "Happy birthday, dear. We should see if something in here is meant just for you." They continued to browse, Lucy enthralled by everything from crocheted kittens to wind-up tin robots that rolled across a little test track on the counter. Hank felt a tug in his chest each time Lucy picked up a toy, only to set it down with a subdued smile. She was trying to spare him the embarrassment of not being able to afford it. Eventually, Lucy's eyes locked on a beautifully carved music box shaped like a heart. It had delicate floral engravings, an old-time latch, and a small figurine of a dancing ballerina inside. Hank grimaced inwardly, guessing it cost well over the entire sum in his pocket. He looked around, trying to distract her with something cheaper. But Lucy was mesmerized by the tune it played, a soft lullaby that sounded like drifting petals in spring. He took a quiet breath, approached Maggie, and asked in the lowest voice possible, how much. Maggie glanced at the box, then at Lucy, her lips parting as if carefully choosing her words. Let me see, she said lightly, checking a small tag underneath. There was a pause, too long, too telling. Then she turned to Hank. I'm so sorry, the price tag must have fallen off. But if you'd like, I can let it go for, oh, I think $6.95 would do. Hank's head jerked up, surprised. He stared at her, wanting to protest that he knew that it should cost more. But Lucy's wide-eyed excitement tugged at him. That's very kind of you, he managed to say, voice tight with gratitude. Maggie's smile was gentle, not pitying. Consider it my way of saying happy birthday to a bright little girl. Lucy clutched her new treasure as they stepped outside, the music box wrapped carefully in brown paper. The winter sun sat higher in the sky now, casting a warmer glow on the quiet street. Hank felt a swirl of relief, gratitude, and something else, unease. He'd grown wary of charity. Over the years, well-meaning people had offered him handouts, usually with a tinge of pity he couldn't stomach. But Maggie's gesture felt different, gentler, as if she were the one grateful to them for choosing her store. He caught Lucy's excited chatter, how the lullaby played 3 times if she turned the key fully, how there was a hidden compartment for secret notes, how the carved roses looked so real. Hank nodded absently, only half listening. He was still thinking about Maggie's expression, an odd mixture of longing and compassion. They made it back to Bluebell, placing the precious package on Lucy's lap. Hank turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, coughed, and died. A second attempt gave the same result. Lucy clutched the paper-wrapped music box, worry creasing her forehead. Hank tried to keep his own frustration in check. This truck was well past its prime, but he had no money to fix it properly. He popped the hood, hopped out, and fiddled with the wires, checking the spark plugs. He tapped the battery terminals with a small wrench. Lucy peered over the dashboard anxiously. After a few minutes, Hank slammed the hood shut and climbed back in. Third time was the charm. The truck finally started, though it made a grinding noise that sent a shiver down Hank's spine. As they pulled away from the curb, Hank noticed Maggie standing in the shop's doorway, arms folded against the cold, watching them go. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she raised a polite wave. He returned it, feeling a tug of curiosity. Who was she? Really, a small-town shopkeeper? Sure, but there was a calm poise about her that suggested a different background. They drove home mostly in silence, Lucy occasionally twisting around the little key on her gift to hear the lullaby. The tune was hauntingly sweet, weaving through the truck's rattles. Hank glanced at Lucy's face, seeing that youthful spark he feared might fade under the weight of their modest reality. She was happy. In that moment, it was enough. When they reached their home, a squat, single-story house with a sagging porch, Lucy sprang out, hugging the box protectively. Hank grabbed her backpack from the truck bed, sighed at the crack in the porch step he still hadn't fixed, and followed her inside. The heater in the living room was set low, just enough to keep the chill at bay. He could almost see his breath in the hallway. He helped Lucy hang her jacket, then guided her to the modest kitchen for a birthday lunch, canned tomato soup, and half a grilled cheese. A part of him wished he could give her a feast. Afterward, Lucy scooted off to her room, likely to examine the music box in private. Hank stood at the sink, scrubbing the pan with steel wool. reflecting on the day. They had a gift, he'd kept his promise, and Lucy was smiling. That alone felt like victory, though. A lingering thought of Maggie Evans and her strange kindness hovered in his mind. Hank's mind returned to Maggie the next day, as he crouched under the hood of Bluebell trying to tighten a loose belt. The frigid air cut through his flannel shirt, but he dared not waste gas idling the engine. The phone inside the house was silent. Few people called him except the electric company or the occasional church volunteer checking in. He thought about how Maggie had lowered the music box price without blinking. Could she afford to do that often? Or was Lucy's birthday just a special case? Hank sensed there was more to her than met the eye. Most store owners in Meadow Falls struggled to scrape by. They wouldn't risk profits out of simple generosity. A bark snapped him out of his thoughts. Looking up, he spotted Lucy bounding across the yard, followed by a scruffy tan dog with mismatched ears. She giggled as it trailed her, tail wagging and a pink tongue lolling out. Hank set down his wrench. "Where'd that come from?" "I saw him by the fence," Lucy said breathlessly. "He seems lost." Hank frowned at the dog. It was on the thin side, but looked friendly enough. "We can't keep him," he cautioned. "You know we can barely afford groceries as it is." Lucy's face fell, but she patted the dog, who lowered his head into her lap. "Can we at least feed him?" "Grandpa," he sobbed, glancing at the leftover meat scraps they sometimes set aside for compost. "All right, but after that, we'll see if anyone's missing a dog." Lucy cheered. Hank didn't have the heart to say no. So while Lucy fetched a small bowl of water in the scraps, Hank rummaged for an old rope to use as a makeshift leash. The dog gobbled the food, tail thumping. Lucy petted him gingerly. She already looked attached, which worried Hank. In that moment, the phone rang from inside the house. Hank muttered a quiet curse, quickly washed his hands with a bit of snow, and raced in to grab it. A distant voice crackled through the receiver, Reverend Clark, from the local church, reminding him of the monthly potluck. Hank thanked him, but politely declined. He rarely joined those gatherings, so feeling out of place among cheerful families. When he returned outside, Lucy was whispering to the dog. "I'm calling you Buddy," she declared. Buddy wagged his tail in earnest. Hank folded his arms. If the pup's owner didn't turn up soon, Lucy would push to keep him. No doubt. That would be one more mouth to feed. He finished tightening the belt on the truck, all the while thinking about the bills piling on the kitchen table. He recalled the envelope from the vet clinic from last year, when Lucy had found an injured stray cat and insisted on helping it. That bill had nearly wiped them out. But Lucy's open-heartedness was part of what made her who she was. After an hour, Hank took a break, glancing over to see Lucy settling Buddy on an old blanket in the garage. A wave of protective affection for the girl swept through him. He realized how seldom he felt that tender surge these days, like he'd closed off parts of himself after losing Jessica. Then a new thought emerged. Maybe he should pick up more repair jobs, or ask around. They needed extra income. And that unspoken memory of Maggie Evans and her quiet shop returned, as though it might hold a solution he couldn't see yet. 2 days later, Hank was hunched over the kitchen table, studying a disassembled watch he planned to repair and sell. He used to do minor watch repairs for co-workers at the lumber mill. Sometimes it earned him a few extra dollars. Lucy sat on the couch, gently brushing Buddy's fur. They still hadn't found the dog's owner. Despite Lucy tacking up a few found dog flyers at the grocery store, a part of Hank suspected no one would claim Buddy. Outside, the sky was a flat gray, promising a cold drizzle. The phone rang again, startling both of them. Hank answered to hear a man's gravelly voice. "Is this Hank Morgan? I heard you fix old machines." "Sometimes," Hank replied guardedly. "Who's asking?" The caller introduced himself as Bill Turner, owner of a small ranch outside town. His old generator had stopped working, and the local mechanic was charging more than he could afford. Hank bit back a bitter laugh. He recognized the feeling. Bill had heard from a friend that Hank was good with engines and might take a cheaper rate. It was short notice, but Bill needed help that very afternoon. Hank agreed. He needed any job he could get, especially with Lucy's winter boots wearing thin and the household budget in tatters. After hanging up, he told Lucy to stay home, but she gave him those pleading eyes. She didn't want to stay cooped up alone. Hank relented, only to realize he had no one to watch her anyway. They wrapped themselves in coats and scarves, bundled Buddy in a frayed blanket in the truck bed, and set off. The drive was tense, the truck's rattles amplified by the cold. Hank felt each bump in the road vibrate through his bones. Lucy, though, kept up a bright chatter about Buddy's funny ear and how she wanted to paint a picture of him. When they arrived, Bill Turner turned out to be an older fellow with a stooped posture but a firm handshake. He led them to a barn where the generator was stored. Hank got to work, fiddling with cables and checking spark plugs. Lucy followed Bill's granddaughter, who turned out to be near her age, to see the ranch's ponies. Buddy trotted behind them at a short distance, uncertain but curious. Hank glanced up occasionally, making sure Lucy was still in sight. He noticed Bill's sympathetic expression. People in small towns hear stories, and Hank's wasn't exactly secret. Bill asked no personal questions, though, which Hank appreciated. Half an hour in, Bill offered Hank a whiskey-laced coffee, but he politely declined. He wanted to keep his head clear, especially around machinery. By the second hour, Hank identified the problem, a corroded connection in the generator's control panel. He improvised a fix using some parts Bill had lying around. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it'd hold until Bill could order replacements. By the time the generator sputtered to life, Lucy had already circled back with Bill's granddaughter, both laughing about the miniature horse that tried to nibble Lucy's hair. Bill handed Hank a small wad of cash, $50, and insisted on adding a loaf of homemade bread. Hank tried not to show how deeply grateful he was. That $50 felt like a windfall. On the drive home, Lucy dozed off, hugging Buddy for warmth. Hank, though tired, felt a small weight lift from his chest. Today, mid-March at least, they'd managed to solve one problem. He even allowed himself a brief flicker of hope maybe, with enough odd jobs, they could keep afloat. That day, he didn't think of Maggie's shop, he was too focused on survival. But fate has a way of nudging thoughts back at the right moment. A few more weeks trickled by, each day feeling like a marathon of small victories and creeping worries. Hank managed to pick up a couple of additional repair tasks, an old tractor carburetor here, a hay baler motor there. Lucy helped by handing him tools and keeping Buddy entertained. The dog had grown noticeably healthier from regular meals, and Lucy's determined flyers never drew a single claim. It seemed Buddy had found a home by default, though Hank's finances kept him up at night. One mid-morning, Lucy said she wanted to visit the library. She was working on a drawing project for school. Hank dropped her off in front of the old stone buildings downtown. "I'll be back in an hour," he told her. Lucy nodded, hugging her coat around her. Buddy, nose pressed against the passenger window, watched her go. Hank found himself driving aimlessly through Meadow Falls, scanning for a place to buy a used snow shovel. Winter was biting harder each week, and the one he had was half rusted. He passed by the antique shop, the thrift store, and then spotted the sign for evergreen keepsakes and toys. He hadn't been back since Lucy's birthday. Curiosity and something deeper, maybe gratitude, drew him to park out front. The window display had changed a vintage rocking horse, crocheted mittens, a small sign advertising a holiday toy drive. He noticed Maggie behind the counter through the glass, talking to a customer. Hank hesitated, unsure if he should go in. His intention was just to say thanks for that day, let her know Lucy loved the music box. But as soon as he stepped inside, the warmth and the cedar vanilla scent washed over him. Maggie's conversation with the other customer ended, and she turned to him with a friendly smile. "Hank, right, I'm glad to see you." She motioned for him to come closer, as if they were old friends. "How's Lucy enjoying her birthday gift?" He shifted on his feet, nodding. "She adores it. Plays that lullaby every night before bed. I've been meaning to come by and say thanks properly." Maggie waved a hand dismissively. "It was a small gesture. Lucy brightened my day. I'm happy she's enjoying it." Unsure how to proceed, Hank glanced around. The store was decorated with small strings of lights, giving the place a soft glow despite the gray skies outside. "You're doing a toy drive?" he asked, noticing the sign. Maggie nodded. "Yes, for kids in the county who might not get much for the holidays. It's partnered with the local church. I wanted to do something special this season, and I have the space." Her voice wavered slightly, hinting that she might have deeper reasons for wanting to help. Hank thought about Lucy's old winter coat and how she'd outgrow it soon. He wondered if Maggie had once been on the receiving end of charity herself, or if this was purely altruistic. They chatted a bit more about the store, about the local economy. Hank found out she'd moved here from a city in the Midwest a couple of years ago, saying only that she wanted a quieter life. She asked if he'd be interested in helping out with any needed repairs in the shop lighting fixtures. Squeaky shelves, simple tasks she didn't have time to handle. It would be paid work. Of course, Hank was taken aback by the offer. "I wouldn't mind," he said carefully. "But I'm not a licensed handyman," Maggie chuckled. "I've seen how you handle yourself. I trust you'll do a fine job. Let's call it a neighborly arrangement." As he left the store, Hank carried a mental list of small tasks Maggie wanted fixed, nothing urgent, but enough to earn him a bit of extra cash. The late morning sun peeked through the clouds, and for a moment, everything felt a little lighter. Over the next week, Hank spent several afternoons at Evergreen Keepsakes and Toys, replacing light bulbs, tightening squeaky hinges, and patching a small leak in the back storage room. True to her word, Maggie paid him promptly. It wasn't a fortune, but it helped cover the cost of Lucy's new boots and a bag of dog food for Buddy. Working in the shop also gave Hank a glimpse into Maggie's personality. She had an aura of gentleness, like a woman who'd seen life's hardships but refused to become hardened herself. Her store was never crowded, though a steady trickle of locals and occasional passers-by popped in to browse. Each time, Maggie greeted them with genuine warmth. One slow afternoon, Maggie made them both coffee in an old percolator behind the counter. She handed Hank a steaming cup. "I'm grateful you said yes to helping out," she said. "This building is older than it looks, and my handyman from last year retired." Hank shrugged. "I should be the one grateful. It's honest work." They sipped quietly for a moment. The store felt cozy, a gentle hum of the heater in the background. Maggie's eyes turned distant. "I used to be in a bigger city," she admitted. "I had a job at a large family company, my late husband's father's enterprise. But after he died, I realized that life was hollow, in some ways." Hank listened, not prying but letting her speak if she wanted. "I needed a reset," she continued. "So I sold what I could, moved here, and opened this place. Toys, keepsakes. I guess I wanted to focus on simpler joys, something that reminded me of childhood innocence, before everything got so complicated." Hank nodded. He understood the urge to retreat from the world. He'd done something similar after Jessica died, except he didn't move. He just withdrew. "It's a beautiful store," he said. "Lucy lights up every time she sees that music box." A small smile curved Maggie's lips. She didn't respond, but her gaze spoke volumes that she found meaning here, in these small connections. That afternoon, Lucy came by after school. She'd walk from the library, Buddy trotting faithfully beside her. Maggie greeted them both like cherished guests, even offering Lucy a homemade cookie from a floral tin she kept under the counter. Hank tried to protest that Lucy shouldn't impose, but Maggie waved him off. Lucy's eyes danced across the shelves. She showed Maggie a drawing she'd done of Buddy with crayons. Maggie praised it genuinely, which made Lucy glow. Hank found himself oddly content in that moment, his granddaughter safe, well-fed, and happy. The presence of Maggie bridging a gap he didn't know existed. Yet a tiny voice nagged at him. "Don't get used to it. People come and go, especially when they realize how little you have to offer in return." Memories of charity that turned to condescension in the past still stung, but Maggie didn't seem to want anything from him except the repairs and a bit of conversation. As the sky darkened, Hank checked his watch. Lucy hopped onto the truck seat with Buddy, leaving Maggie and Hank alone for a moment by the shop door. Thank you, she said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. Not just for the work, your company here. It helps. He found himself nodding, unsure how to answer. Her gratitude felt genuine, and that left him feeling strangely off balance. Because beneath his worn jacket and guarded demeanor, a warmth was growing, one that both comforted and terrified him. Winter arrived in force a couple of weeks later, dumping a blanket of snow across Meadow Falls that transformed the quiet streets into a hushed expanse of white. The roof of Hank's house groaned under the weight, so he climbed a ladder to shovel off as much as he could, ignoring the pain in his knee. Lucy watched from a window, biting her lip with worry. School was canceled for a day due to icy roads, so Lucy spent the morning inside, doodling pictures of Buddy and forging imaginary stories. Hank's mind drifted to the stack of bills on the kitchen table: electric, water, the lingering hospital charges from Jessica's final days. He was late again. He wondered how much he had left from the odd jobs Maggie gave him. Probably not enough. That afternoon, with the roads somewhat cleared, Lucy begged to go see Maggie's shop. She said she'd show me how to crochet a little hat for Buddy. Lucy chirped excitedly. Hank caved, and they braved the slick roads in Bluebell. Buddy stayed home this time, tucked in the warm living room. Evergreen keepsakes and toys looked enchanting in the snow. Icicles hanging from the eaves, lights glowing behind frosted windows. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Lucy made a beeline to the back table where Maggie had set up a small crocheting station. Hank lingered near the counter, exhaling the chill from his lungs. He expected to stay just long enough to see Lucy settled, but Maggie emerged from the back room with a troubled expression. "Hank, do you have a moment?" she asked quietly. She led him to the small office in the back of the shop, where the walls were lined with boxes of old toys and ledger books. Maggie explained that a local radio station had called. They'd heard about her toy drive and wanted to run a story. The publicity could help gather more donations, but also might draw attention to her personal history she wasn't ready to spill. "I'm not trying to hide anything." "Exactly," she clarified, voice tense. "But once people figure out who I used to be, I'm worried they'll see me differently." Hank folded his arms. "I can understand wanting privacy, but if this helps kids, maybe it's worth the risk." Maggie paced, hugging herself. "You're right. I left behind a powerful family business. If they find me here, it could get complicated. Lawyers, inheritance questions, controlling shares. I thought I walked away from all that." Hank was taken aback. He knew she'd come from somewhere else, but not that it was this entangled. "Are you, from some wealthy background?" Maggie sighed. "My in-laws had more money than they knew what to do with. I was never comfortable with it, especially after my husband's death. Let's just say I refused to sign certain documents. I wanted out." He scratched at the stubble on his chin, not entirely sure what to say. "Look, if people do come poking around, you've done nothing wrong. You opened a store, you do charity. Why would that be a problem?" Her shoulders slumped. It shouldn't be, in a perfect world, but sometimes wealth has a way of twisting good intentions. She paused, then gave him a small smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unload all that on you. I just needed a friend to talk to." "Friend," Hank echoed softly. It had been a long time since he'd considered someone outside of Lucy as a friend, but here he was, in a toy shop's cramped office, listening to a woman who'd left a life of privilege behind because it hurt too much. He felt something stir inside him, a gentle protectiveness. "Maybe. Don't worry," he finally said, voice steady. "I'm not going to judge. And if they come snooping, well, maybe it'll turn into free advertising for your store." Maggie gave a soft laugh, though her eyes still held traces of concern. They both glanced out the door window where Lucy sat, trying to crochet a tiny circle with clumsy fingers. It was a picture of warmth amid the cold uncertainties they both faced. True to Maggie's concerns, word of her toy drive spread beyond Meadow Falls. A local reporter did a short piece, praising the generosity of evergreen keepsakes and toys and its owner, Maggie Evans. The story featured a few photos of the shop's cozy interior, children picking out toys, and Maggie standing beside Hank. He happened to be handing her a newly repaired shelf bracket. Lucy at his side. The shot looked innocently domestic, but it sparked gossip in the region's small news circles. Suddenly, calls from out-of-town numbers began trickling in, some from charity organizations wanting to partner, others from curious folks attempting to pin down Maggie's past. She deflected most of them. Hank watched with concern, noticing how her shoulders tensed each time the phone rang. It reminded him of those days after Jessica died, when well-intentioned people pried into his grief with personal questions. One crisp morning, while Hank was recaulking a window at the shop, a sleek black SUV rolled up. Two men in tailored coats stepped out, scanning the facade with practiced eyes. Hank's stomach knotted. They looked out of place like corporate lawyers or private investigators. Maggie emerged from the shop, face going pale. He overheard scraps of their conversation, Miss Evans. We're here on behalf of the Carter Henderson estate. There are outstanding matters regarding your late husband's holdings. Maggie's voice shook. That's been resolved. I left everything behind. One man opened a briefcase. We need your signature on a few documents to finalize the renunciation of your share. You understand the estate retains the right to Hank didn't catch the rest, as he went inside to give them space. But Lucy, who'd been reading in a corner, asked, Grandpa, what's going on? He didn't know how to answer. Just some business Maggie's handling, he muttered. He patted Lucy's shoulder. Don't worry, sweet pea. 10 minutes later, Maggie came back in, her expression drawn. She retreated to the back office, shutting the door. Hank heard muffled voices, the men following her, pressing for statements. Eventually, they left. Maggie emerged looking shaken, cheeks flushed. When she met Hank's eye, she mustered a brittle smile that quickly dissolved into tears. He guided her to a chair and handed her a tissue. What can I do? Her breath hitched. They're basically forcing me to finalize the process of giving up any claim to the Carter Henderson business. Part of me is relieved, but it's complicated. They treat me like I'm this rebellious child. They can freeze accounts, challenge my legal rights. She stopped, burying her face in the tissue. Hank wasn't sure if it was from fear, frustration, or regret. Maybe all of the above. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Lucy stood off to the side, hugging her teddy, clearly upset but too young to fully grasp the situation. Hank placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder. Look, you left that world for a reason. Don't let them bully you into thinking you were wrong. Her damp eyes lifted. I feel powerless. No matter what I do, they act like they own my choices. Hank wanted to fix it, to protect her, but he was just an old lumber mill worker with a knack for repairs. Still, a surprising surge of protectiveness rose in him. You're not alone, he said quietly. Then he glanced at Lucy. And you've got us, for whatever that's worth. Maggie nodded, her lips trembling in a brief smile. Sometimes the simplest offers of solidarity can feel like lifelines in a churning sea. A few days later, the weather turned vicious. Thick gray clouds smothered the sky, and the local forecast warned of a blizzard sweeping across the region. Hank spent the morning boarding up windows on his house where the glass was thin and double-checking that the generator he'd borrowed from Bill Turner still had enough fuel. Lucy kept Buddy in the living room, hoping the dog wouldn't panic in the storm. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, howling like a banshee. Snow fell in relentless waves, piling fast and high. Hank decided they'd better hunker down and wait it out. He brewed some weak coffee and let Lucy sip a bit, a rare treat. The power flickered twice, sending a jolt of fear through him if it went out. The house would freeze in no time. Outside, the world vanished behind swirling drifts. Lucy had been restless all day, doodling pictures of stars and rereading the same library book. Grandpa, she finally said, pulling her boots on. Buddy's whining by the door. I think he needs to go out. Hank checked the window. Whiteout conditions, zero visibility. Okay, but you're staying on the porch while he does his business. No wandering off. She nodded solemnly, opening the door a crack. Immediately, a gust of frigid air whipped inside, stinging Hank's cheeks. Lucy stepped out, Buddy scurrying ahead into knee-deep snow. The dog yelped but carried on. Hank hovered in the doorway, arms folded, teeth chattering. Moments later, Lucy called back. "He's run around the sod. I'll grab him." Hank started to protest, but she was already bounding off the porch. He muttered a curse under his breath, stepping forward to catch her. Then the wind slammed the door shut. By the time he pried it open again, Lucy and Buddy were out of sight. Panic lanced through him. He yanked on his boots, grabbed a flashlight and a coat, and plunged into the storm. Snow pelted his face, each icy flake like a miniature blade. "Lucy," he shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. He found footprints near the porch, quickly filling with fresh snow. He followed them around to the side of the house, shining the flashlight in the frantic arcs. The footprints led further into the yard, then disappeared near a row of pines. Hank's heart hammered. If Lucy wandered too far, she could get disoriented and lost in minutes. He trudged forward, knees protesting, lungs burning from the icy air. Each step sank him mid-calf in powder. His voice grew hoarse. "Lucy, Buddy." No answer but the raging wind. Hank's mind flashed with images of Jessica, how he'd failed to save her from illness, how Lucy was all he had left. "I won't lose her," he told himself, pushing onward. In desperation, he looked back toward the house barely visible. If he kept going, he risked getting lost himself. But leaving Lucy out there alone was not an option. Sleet whipped at his face, stinging his eyes. He pressed on, calling out, scanning the swirling white. Minutes felt like hours. Then, dimly, he thought he saw a movement near a fence line. He stumbled that way, nearly slipping into a half-frozen ditch. Light flickered across something, a pair of small footprints. He followed them around a cluster of trees until he saw Lucy's boot prints merging with dog tracks. His chest tightened in relief, at least they were together. But the prints stopped abruptly at a break in the fence. Beyond it lay open land leading toward the old creek. Fear clamped his throat. He forced himself onward, gripping the fence post for stability. Just when Hank was convinced he might collapse from the effort, a flicker of light appeared through the curtain of snow. At first, he thought it was a trick of his eyes, but as he stumbled closer, he realized it was the dim glow of headlights from a vehicle plowing through a narrow side road. He turned his flashlight in that direction, waving it frantically. The vehicle slowed to a crawl. Through the swirling flakes, he could barely make out the shape of a large pickup. Then a voice, Hank. Hank Morgan. He recognized it instantly. Maggie Evans. Relief and a surge of astonishment flooded him. She must have been checking on them. Braving the storm, he moved toward the truck, but remembered Lucy. "Lucy's out here," he shouted, choking on the cold air. Buddy, too. Maggie's truck headlights illuminated a few more feet of white. Then the passenger door flung open, and Maggie appeared in a heavy coat and snow boots, carrying another flashlight. "We'll find her," she shouted back over the wind. They fanned out, scouring the fence line. Maggie's glove-clad hand clasped Hank's shoulder. "We can't go far from the truck," she warned. "We'll freeze out here." Hank pressed his trembling lips together. "She can't be far," he insisted. Pushing through another drift, his body felt numb, but adrenaline fueled him. He found footprints again near the fence break, faint but leading to a small copse of trees. "Lucy," he roared, the wind stealing the echo. Then came a bark, faint, muffled by the gale. Buddy, Maggie yelled, shining her flashlight wildly. The bark repeated. She ran forward, Hank on her heels. Finally, they saw Lucy's bright pink coat in the beam. She was crouched under a low branch, hugging Buddy as the dog whined and pawed at the snow. Maggie reached them first. "Oh, thank God." She pulled Lucy up, wrapping her in the thick folds of her coat. Lucy's face was beet red from cold, tears frozen on her lashes. Hank fell to his knees next to them, arms shaking as he touched Lucy's cheeks. "Are you okay? Can you stand?" Lucy nodded weakly, too cold to speak. She clutched Buddy's collar as if it were a lifeline. He was shivering, too, but alive. Without further ado, Hank scooped Lucy into his arms. While Maggie grabbed Buddy, they staggered back toward the headlights. which felt like the only beacon of life in a world of swirling white. Inside the truck, the heater roared, bummed. Maggie hauled out blankets from the back seat, wrapping Lucy and Buddy. Hank slumped in the passenger seat, breath ragged. Lucy's teeth chattered violently, but color returned to her cheeks. He couldn't form words, just mouthed silent thanks. Maggie gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "We're going to my place," she announced. "It's closer than your house. I have a fireplace and a generator." Hank managed a nod. He was too numb and exhausted to protest. Lucy whimpered softly, more from shock than pain. Hank rubbed her hands in his, coaxing warmth back into them. Through the windshield, the wipers fought a losing battle against the fury of the storm. But Maggie drove with surprising skill. She navigated the narrow road, taking them toward the edge of town. Hank wondered vaguely if Maggie lived in or near her shop, but he soon realized she had a small cabin half a mile behind it. At last, they pulled up to a simple, single-story log house. Warm lamplight glowed in the windows, and the wind seemed slightly calmer in the trees around it. Maggie parked, hurried out to open the front door, then helped Hank carry Lucy and Buddy inside. The sudden rush of warmth hit them like a blessing. A large stone fireplace danced with flames, throwing flickers of orange across a cozy living room strewn with quilts and crocheted pillows. Maggie guided Lucy to the couch, piling more blankets on her, while Hank sank beside them, adrenaline fading into bone-deep exhaustion. Buddy remained at Lucy's feet, nuzzling her shins, as if refusing to let her out of sight again. Maggie disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with steaming mugs of tea, pressing one gently into Hank's trembling hands. The fire popped and crackled, an almost comforting sound in the hush that followed. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but in here it felt like they'd found the only safe harbor in a storm-ravaged sea. For the next hour, they huddled by the fireplace. Lucy curled up in Hank's lap with a towel around her hair. Her teeth eventually stopped chattering, and the dog drifted into a wary sleep, muzzle resting on Lucy's leg. Hank closed his eyes, letting the heat penetrate his numb limbs. Maggie lit a few more lanterns, anticipating a power outage. She moved about the living room, tossing extra logs on the fire, adjusting the blankets. The quiet, purposeful care she gave them reminded Hank of a scene from a kinder time before life taught him that comfort always had a price. When Lucy regained her strength, she tearfully apologized. "I was just trying to grab Buddy," she said, voice raspy. "He darted off, and I didn't want him getting lost. Then I couldn't see the house anymore." Hank smoothed her damp hair. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart. We found you. That's all that matters." Eventually, Maggie coaxed Lucy to sip some hot broth she'd warmed on a small propane stove in the kitchen. Hank, still in a half-daze, sipped gingerly from his own cup, tasting salt and vegetables that lit a spark in his empty stomach. He realized he hadn't eaten much all day, too busy bracing for the storm. They spoke in hushed voices about the storm's severity. It showed no signs of letting up soon. The roads were likely impassable. The phone line was out, and cell service in Meadow Falls was notoriously patchy. It became clear they'd be riding this out together. For a time, no one mentioned the tension that had hovered around Maggie's background or Hank's financial struggles. Survival overshadowed every concern. Lucy drifted off to sleep, her breath evening out, Buddy snoring softly at her side. Hank carefully set a pillow under Lucy's head and rose to help Maggie gather more firewood from a small lean-to attached to the cabin. Outside, the wind roared. Though the porch offered some respite from the snow, Maggie handed him a flashlight and a thick pair of gloves. They worked in silence, stacking logs in a metal bucket. After the initial rush of rescue, the enormity of what had almost happened sank in, and Hank found himself shaking with delayed shock. He felt Maggie's hand on his arm, steadying him. "You saved her," he said shakily. "If you hadn't come by." She cut him off gently. "Don't. You would have found her." He let out a ragged breath. "We both know that might not be true. I was half lost myself." Maggie's eyes glistened. "I came to check on you too. I just had this feeling. I'm glad I listened." In that moment, beneath the howling storm, Hank felt something shift between them. A closeness not forged by small-town gossip or friendly visits, but by genuine care in the face of danger. He realized how fragile life could be, how everything can change in a swirl of snow and a single desperate heartbeat. They finished hauling the logs inside, stacking them near the fireplace. Lucy slept on, oblivious to the watery look in her grandfather's eyes. Hank sank into a chair, across from Maggie. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. The wind battered the windows, but they had warmth. They had each other, and for the first time in ages, Hank felt a quiet sense of belonging. Morning crept in slowly, though the blizzard still rasped against the walls. Maggie had dozed on a recliner. Hank nodded off in the chair beside her. Lucy and Buddy remained on the couch, entwined in blankets. The faint daylight showed swirling snow that nearly buried Maggie's pickup. It would be a while before any real travel was possible. Hank rose stiffly, every muscle protesting. He checked the fireplace embers remained, so he gently added kindling and blew on them until the flames returned. Maggie stirred, rubbing her eyes. "We're still here," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. He nodded, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "Could be worse. Right, the roof's holding." As Lucy and Buddy woke, Maggie declared she'd make a proper breakfast. She rummaged in her cupboards, pulling out oatmeal, canned fruit, and powdered milk. Hank offered to help, but she insisted he rest. Left with no real argument, he sat near Lucy, checking her over for any signs of frostbite. Thankfully, aside from red cheeks and a mild cough, she seemed fine. The night's ordeal left her quiet, though, while Maggie bustled about, the phone rang once, just a faint buzz. Then silence. The storm must have partially restored power only to snatch it away again. Maggie frowned. "I wanted to call the shop. Make sure everything was okay there. But it'll have to wait." After breakfast, they tried the radio. Static hissed until a local station crackled and roads were closed, multiple power lines down. "If you can shelter in place, do so," the announcer said, urging folks to check on neighbors. That last phrase made Hank catch Maggie's eye. They had checked on each other. Lucy kept Buddy occupied, playing a gentle game of tug-of-war with an old sock. Hank noticed her sniffle a bit, the chill from last night lingering in her system. Maggie offered her some children's cough syrup, which Lucy swallowed with a grimace. As midday approached, Hank insisted on clearing at least some of the snow around Maggie's cabin. He bundled up and stepped outside, shovel in hand, the wind significantly calmer now. Clouds drifted overhead, but the snowfall lessened. Each shovelful reminded him how old his body was getting. Still, he pressed on, forging a path around the truck, then the porch. Back inside, he found Maggie sorting through a box. She removed crocheted scarves and gloves in bright colors, rummaging until she found a thick burgundy scarf. "For Lucy," she said, pressing it into Hank's hands. "She needs something warmer for her neck." He accepted it quietly, remembering the old scarf Lucy had worn for years, now threadbare. Then he cleared his throat. "Maggie, about what you told me. All this inheritance stuff. If you need help," she waved him off. "The best help is just having someone I trust. I'll deal with the lawyers once the road's clear. Sign away whatever's needed. They can keep their money. I just want to live my life." Hank thought about the tension that had weighed on him for so long: bills, finances, the sense of never climbing out of a hole. And here was Maggie, willingly walking away from a fortune. "That's braver than most folks realize," he said. She looked down. "We've all got our storms, Hank. Mine just happens to come with paperwork." Her soft laugh broke some of the heaviness. Lucy wandered over, carefully looping the scarf around her neck, a new flush of color in her cheeks. Buddy wagged his tail. Outside, faint sunlight broke through a gap in the clouds, casting a gentle glow across the snow-laden yard. Hank watched them, Maggie standing next to Lucy, the dog at their feet. For an instant, he imagined a future that wasn't so lonely. Not some dream of riches, but a life where people helped each other without expectation. He swallowed hard, pushing away the ache of hope that sometimes felt more frightening than despair. It took another day for the plows to reach Maggie's road. By then, Lucy's cough had eased, and Buddy showed no ill effects from his misadventure. Hank lent a hand clearing more snow, while Maggie made sure the cabin stayed warm and stocked. He noted how smoothly they'd settled into a rhythm like a makeshift family contending with the winter. When the roads finally opened, Hank decided to return home to assess any damage. Maggie insisted on driving them, since her truck had better snow chains. Lucy and Buddy piled into the back seat, Lucy waving goodbye to the cozy fireplace that had been her refuge. The drive took longer than usual due to ice, but they arrived to find Hank's house mostly intact. The porch weighed down by snow, but not collapsed. Hank paused in the driveway. "If you need anything," he told Maggie, "you know where we live." She glanced at the battered house. "I do," she said softly, "and I might have a proposition for you when things settle." A week later, that proposition took shape. While Lucy played in the snow with Buddy, Hank replaced a busted window pane in the living room. The phone rang, and to his relief, it wasn't a bill collector. It was Maggie, asking if he could come by the shop. She sounded uncharacteristically excited. He arrived to find the store abuzz with activity. Despite the storm's aftermath, people were streaming in to pick up donated toys or drop off used ones. Maggie waved Hank over to a corner where a section of the store had been cleared. Her eyes sparkled. "I'm expanding," she said, gesturing to the newly revealed space. "It won't just be toys and keepsakes. I've got a room back here big enough to house a small repair workshop. What if you and I partner up?" Hank hesitated, a swirl of emotions in his chest. "I'm not, I mean, I fix stuff, but I'm no business owner." She smiled. "You'll have your own corner, your name on the sign, whatever you want. I see folks all the time who come in with old music boxes, wooden antiques, small mechanical knickknacks that need a craftsman's touch. I can't do it, but you can." His throat felt tight. How, how would it work financially?" Maggie shrugged, as though the details were trivial. "We split fair. I'm not in this to make millions. I just want to offer a service that folks around here need. It helps me keep the store lively, helps you earn a stable income." Hank stood there, staring at the empty space. He pictured shelves of tools, old lamps, half-finished wooden figures. Lucy could do her homework in a corner, Buddy napping on a rug. For the first time in a long while, the prospect of a future that wasn't overshadowed by debt or survival began to glimmer. He turned to Maggie, voice unsteady. I'd be honored." "But you're sure about letting me in like this?" She nodded, sincerity shining in her eyes. "You've already been here, Hank, in spirit. Since that first day with Lucy's music box, they worked out a basic plan and she'd pay for initial supplies. He'd handle the repairs. A modest percentage of sales or tips would go back into the store to cover costs. Simple, trusting, the way small-town folks used to do business." A month later, the sign changed. Now it read Evergreen Keepsakes and Repairs, Evans and Morgan. Inside, a small plaque hung near Hank's workshop corner built on trust. It wasn't flashy, but it told the story two people from starkly different worlds, forging a shared future in a humble toy shop. And on that day, Lucy arrived after school, wearing her crocheted scarf, Buddy galloping in behind her. Maggie was adjusting a display of newly donated antiques, and Hank was showing a customer how he fixed a music box gear. They both looked up as Lucy flashed a broad, uninhibited smile, one that belonged to a child who finally felt secure. Hank's heart swelled with gratitude, and perhaps something more he couldn't quite name yet. This partnership didn't erase all hardship. Bills would still come, storms would still rage, and grief wouldn't vanish. But as Lucy's laughter filled the air, and Maggie's eyes warmed with quiet pride, Hank understood that real hope had moved in among them, bridging the gaps. In that final moment, he took a deep breath and silently thanked every storm that led him here to a promise kept, a child saved, and a bond that might just outlast the harshest Montana winter. In the end, it wasn't wealth, power, or pride that defined their journey, but quiet acts of courage and compassion shared in the darkest moments. Life had dealt them scars, each loss etched deeply into hearts that once feared hope might never return. But out of a fierce storm, two souls found warmth and understanding, turning broken pieces into something new, something strong. They learned that trust isn't built overnight, nor is family defined solely by blood. It's forged in the fires of hardship and sacrifice, in whispered prayers and steady hands reaching through darkness. They faced fears they once buried deep, found courage they thought was long gone, and discovered love doesn't always appear as a grand gesture. It emerges in quiet glances, shared burdens, and simple acts of kindness. Yet, for all they'd endured, the future remained unwritten, fragile as the first breath after a storm. They knew better than to take happiness for granted, knowing life's greatest gifts often carry the heaviest costs. So tell me, when life storms around you, what quiet strength do you reach for? And who, when the winds howl loudest, do you trust to stand beside you?